The November fog of 1894 had settled upon London like a living shroud, pressing against the windows of 221B Baker Street with such persistence that even the gaslight seemed to struggle against its yellow embrace. I had returned from my morning rounds to find my friend Sherlock Holmes in one of his more peculiar moods, hunched over his chemical apparatus with the intense concentration of a man attempting to unlock the secrets of the universe through the medium of aromatic compounds. The sitting room reeked of lavender, not the pleasant, garden-fresh scent one might expect, but something more clinical and sharp. Holmes held a test tube to the light, his aquiline profile etched against the wan glow of the gas jets, while scattered about his workspace lay various botanical specimens and sheets of calculations, covered in his precise handwriting. "Watson," he said without looking up, "would you say that the average criminal possesses sufficient knowledge of organic chemistry to distinguish between lavender and gustifolia, cultivated in Surrey chalk, and that grown in the volcanic soil of Sicily?" I set down my medical bag and approached his makeshift laboratory with the wariness of long experience. "I should think most criminals have more pressing concerns than botanical geography, Holmes." "Precisely my point." He held up the vial, its contents a pale purple liquid that seemed to shimmer in the gaslight. "The primary constituent, linalool," he gestured to a chemical formula scrawled on a nearby paper, "varies subtly based on soil composition and climate. To the untrained nose, all lavender is merely pleasant. To the chemist, each variant tells a story of its origin. C10H18O, C10H18O. "And this relates to a case?" I inquired hopefully, for Holmes had been insufferably restless these past weeks in the absence of any stimulating problem. "Not as yet," he admitted, finally setting down the tube, "though I have found that when one prepares the mind for a particular type of problem, the universe has an amusing tendency to provide it. Consider this an exercise in—" His words were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps upon our stair, followed by Mrs. Hudson's familiar knock. She entered bearing a small silver tray, upon which lay not the usual calling card, but an envelope of such distinctive appearance that both Holmes and I immediately took notice. "A young lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," our landlady announced. "She's in quite a state, I'm afraid, and insists the matter is most urgent. She wouldn't give her name, but left this for you to examine." The envelope was of the finest quality paper, dyed a delicate shade of lavender that seemed almost to glow in the dim light of our sitting room. It was sealed with purple wax, bearing the impression of what appeared to be a thorn bush with 3 roses, and addressed in a hand so precise and regular that it might have been set by a printing press. Holmes snatched up the envelope with an alacrity that betrayed his interest, though he did not immediately break the seal. Instead, he held it to the light, examined the watermark, and, to my surprise, brought it close to his nose. "Curious," he murmured. "The paper is of continental manufacture, probably French, but the wax is distinctly English. The scent—" He paused, his nostrils flaring slightly. "There is lavender, certainly, but underneath— Watson, do you detect anything else?" I sniffed obediently. "Perhaps a faint trace of something medicinal?" "Bitter almonds," Holmes said grimly, "the unmistakable signature of prussic acid. Our correspondent, it would seem, has been handling cyanide." He looked up sharply. "Mrs. Hudson, show the lady up immediately. And Watson, your service revolver, if you please. I suspect we are about to encounter a problem that will test both our deductive abilities and our physical courage." The woman who entered our sitting room was perhaps 30 years of age, possessed of that particular composure that comes from education and breeding, yet her dark eyes held a wildness that spoke of recent terror. She was dressed in a traveling costume of deep blue, well made but showing signs of hasty donning, and her gloved hands trembled as she clutched a small leather portfolio. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice steady despite her evident distress, "I am Miss Cordelia Ashworth, and I fear that if you cannot help me recover what has been stolen, the consequences will extend far beyond my own ruin." Holmes gestured to the chair I had hastily cleared. "Please be seated, Miss Ashworth. I observe that you have traveled from Kew. The distinctive red clay on your boots is particular to the construction work near the garden station, and that you came here in considerable haste despite the fog. The matter concerns this envelope, I presume." She stared at him with the expression of one who has witnessed a conjuring trick. "How could you possibly? But yes, you are correct on all counts. Mr. Holmes, I am the head archivist at the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew, and yesterday morning I received a most unusual delivery." "Pray tell us the entire story," Holmes said, settling back in his chair with his fingertips pressed together. "Omit no detail, however trivial it may appear." Miss Ashworth composed herself with visible effort. "Yesterday at precisely 9 o'clock, a courier arrived at my office. He was not one of our regular messengers. Indeed, I had never seen him before. He wore a distinctive livery of dark green with silver piping, and his buttons bore a crest depicting a serpent coiled around a staff." "The rod of Asclepius," I interjected. "A medical symbol." "Or," Holmes added quietly, "the mark of one who deals in both healing and harm. Continue, Miss Ashworth." The courier handed me an envelope, identical to the one I've brought you, and spoke only a single phrase. "The root holds the remedy." Then he departed without waiting for any response. Inside the envelope, I found no letter, but rather a pressed botanical specimen, a plant I did not recognize, resembling wolf's bane but with distinctive silver-edged leaves, and a card bearing what appeared to be a cipher. She opened her portfolio and withdrew a sheet of paper. I copied the cipher before placing the original in my office safe. It is a Chubb lock, Mr. Holmes, designed specifically for archival security. I have the only key, and my office door was locked when I left for luncheon. Holmes examined the copied cipher, his eyes brightening with interest. X7J9 Lav 22, B4K1 Rho S99, M3Q5 Diag 11, ZH2ACN 00, P4 BL 33, W1R7 Sol 55. When I returned an hour later, Miss Ashworth continued, both doors remained locked. Yet when I opened the safe, she shuddered. The lavender envelope was gone. In its place was a single dried marigold head, and the air inside the safe reeked of bitter almonds. Holmes sprang to his feet with sudden energy. "Miss Ashworth, you have brought us a problem of considerable complexity. The botanical specimen you describe, silver-leaved aconitum, is likely a rare and potentially uncatalogued variant of wolfsbane, one of nature's most potent poisons. The cipher appears to follow a cataloging system, possibly referring to specific plant locations or chemical compounds. And the presence of cyanide suggests that our thief is not merely interested in academic botany." He began to pace, his mind clearly racing. "The marigold left in place of your envelope, in the Victorian language of flowers, it signifies grief, despair, or cruelty. A taunt, Miss Ashworth, from someone who wishes you to know that they have taken what you were meant to protect." "But Mr. Holmes," she said desperately, "how could anyone have entered a locked room and opened a locked safe without leaving any trace?" Holmes paused in his pacing, a thin smile playing about his lips. "There are several possibilities, none of them comforting. But first, we must examine the scene. Watson, your coat and medical bag. We go to Kew, and we go armed." As we prepared to depart, Holmes turned back to our client. "One final question, Miss Ashworth. In your capacity as head archivist, do you have access to any records concerning experimental botanical work, particularly anything involving the cultivation of poisonous plants for medicinal purposes?" Her face went pale. "There are certain restricted files. Research conducted during the Crimean War into plant-based medicines and their alternative applications. But those records are classified, Mr. Holmes. Only 3 people have access to them. And they are myself, the director of Kew Gardens, and—" She hesitated. "Dr. Marcus Thornfield, who heads our pharmaceutical botany division. He is a brilliant man, but he has been acting strangely of late. missing meetings, working odd hours, and asking unusual questions about our security procedures. Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me. Then we have our first suspect, Watson. Come, the fog will provide excellent cover for our investigation, and thanks to Miss Ashworth's detailed observations, we have both a scent to follow and a cipher to decode. As we descended into the yellow murk of Baker Street, I could not shake the feeling that we were walking into something far more dangerous than a simple theft. The lavender envelope had carried more than botanical secrets. It had carried death itself, wrapped in the innocent guise of pressed flowers and scholarly correspondence. The game, as Holmes was fond of saying, was afoot, but this time, I feared, we were hunting a quarry who was quite prepared to kill to protect their secrets. The hansom cab fought its way through the thickening fog toward Kew, the horse's breath creating ghostly plumes in the yellow murk. Holmes sat hunched in his corner, his sharp features etched in concentration, while Miss Ashworth clutched her portfolio with white-knuckled determination. The rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestones provided the only sound until Holmes finally spoke. "You mentioned that Dr. Thornfield has been acting strangely of late," he said quietly. "In what manner, precisely?" Miss Ashworth shifted uncomfortably. "He has been working unusual hours, arriving before dawn and remaining long after the gardens close. His laboratory assistants whisper that he's been conducting experiments with compounds not typically associated with botanical research." Holmes nodded grimly as our cab drew to a halt before the imposing gates of the Royal Botanical Gardens. Even in the fog, the great glass houses loomed like crystal cathedrals, their iron frameworks barely visible through the swirling mist. Miss Ashworth led us along gravel paths toward a modest brick building that housed the administrative offices. "My office is on the second floor," she explained, producing her keys. "The building is secured after hours, with only senior staff permitted entry." Holmes examined the exterior door with meticulous attention. "No signs of forced entry," he murmured. "The lock shows normal wear, consistent with regular use. Our thief either possessed authorized access or found another means entirely." We climbed narrow stairs to Miss Ashworth's office, a well-organized space lined with botanical texts and specimen cabinets. Holmes immediately crossed to the iron safe built into the wall behind her desk, kneeling to examine the Chubb lock with his magnifying glass. "Excellent craftsmanship," he observed. "Miss Ashworth, please demonstrate exactly how you opened this yesterday upon discovering the theft." She inserted her key and turned it with practiced precision. The heavy door swung open, revealing several shelves of documents and the accusatory marigold head lying in solitary prominence. Holmes produced a small vial and carefully scraped samples from the safe's interior surfaces. "Watson, observe the metal. What strikes you as unusual?" I peered inside, noting the pristine condition of the iron walls. "It appears remarkably clean for a safe in regular use." "Precisely. This interior has been thoroughly cleaned with lavender oil, ostensibly to mask the scent of bitter almonds, though traces remain." Holmes withdrew his sampling tool. The cleaning was recent and professional, suggesting our thief possessed both chemical knowledge and meticulous habits. Heavy footsteps in the corridor interrupted his analysis. A tall, gaunt man appeared in the doorway, his iron-gray beard framing pale, intelligent eyes. He wore a laboratory coat over formal attire, and his presence immediately charged the atmosphere with tension. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice carrying a slight rasp. "I heard voices and came to investigate. I trust nothing is amiss?" "Dr. Thornfield," she replied carefully. "May I present Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson? They are investigating yesterday's incident." The effect of Holmes's name was immediate and telling. Dr. Thornfield's composed expression flickered momentarily, revealing something between alarm and calculation before he recovered his professional demeanor. "Mr. Holmes, your reputation precedes you," he said, though his tone lacked warmth. I confess surprise that Miss Ashworth felt it necessary to engage outside assistance for what surely amounts to an administrative oversight. That rather depends, Holmes replied coolly, upon whether one considers the theft of dangerous botanical specimens and the deployment of chemical agents to be merely administrative concerns. Before Dr. Thornfield could respond, another voice interrupted from the corridor. "What is the meaning of this gathering?" A distinguished gentleman of 60 entered, his bearing reflecting the authority of high office. His clean-shaven features and precise dress marked him as a man accustomed to committees and formal proceedings. "Sir Erasmus Pelling," Miss Ashworth said quickly. "Our director. Sir Erasmus, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes." The director's reaction was subtly different from Dr. Thornfield's, less alarm than annoyance, though beneath it lurked something that might have been concern. "Mr. Holmes, while your reputation is certainly known to me, I had hoped this unfortunate incident might be resolved internally. The involvement of outside parties in government institutional matters requires careful consideration." Holmes regarded both men with keen interest. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns regarding discretion. However, when dangerous materials vanish from supposedly secure locations through means that suggest both scientific expertise and criminal intent, the matter transcends administrative boundaries." The tension in the small office was palpable as the three men, scientist, administrator, and detective, measured each other. Holmes's eyes moved between them, cataloguing details with the precision of a naturalist studying specimens. "I shall require interviews with both of you," Holmes announced finally. "The cipher suggests this theft was merely the opening movement in a larger composition. We must determine the conductor before the final notes are played." Holmes waited until both Sir Erasmus and Dr. Thornfield had withdrawn to the outer corridor before turning his full attention to the scene. The tension in Miss Ashworth's shoulders visibly eased once the two men were no longer present, though her hands continued to tremble slightly as she watched Holmes begin his methodical examination. "You are absolutely certain that you alone possess a key to this safe?" Holmes inquired, kneeling before the iron strongbox with his magnifying glass. "Completely certain," she replied. "The duplicate is sealed in Sir Erasmus's private strongbox, and that seal has remained unbroken for years. He takes considerable pride in that fact." Holmes smiled grimly. "Pride which we shall presently test." He examined not only the lock mechanism, but the surrounding woodwork and metal framework. "Observe, Watson, no scratches, no displaced metal filings, no dulling of the brass such as one might expect from the clumsy application of picking tools. Our intruder opened this safe as legitimately, to all appearances, as its rightful owner." "But how is that possible?" Miss Ashworth asked. "That, my dear lady, is precisely what we must determine." Holmes produced a small vial and began scraping samples from the safe's interior. "The hinges have been recently oiled with a medicinal-grade compound, faintly camphoraceous. Yet you have never maintained this safe yourself." "Never. The hinges have never given me trouble." Holmes straightened, his eyes bright with interest. "Then someone with both access and expertise has been here recently. Someone who wanted this safe to open silently." He turned to examine the positioning of her desk. "When Dr. Thornfield visited yesterday, where precisely did he stand?" Miss Ashworth indicated a spot near the corner of her desk. Holmes immediately produced a length of string, stretching it from that position to the safe's lock mechanism. "Perfect sight line," he murmured. "A man of his height could easily observe your key movements, noting the precise angle and pressure required. Most people develop habitual patterns when operating locks, patterns that can be studied and replicated." A knock interrupted his analysis, and a young man in a stained laboratory coat appeared hesitantly in the doorway. His earnest features and chemical-stained hands marked him immediately as a working scientist rather than an administrator. "Forgive the intrusion," he said quietly. "I am Gerald Whitmore, Dr. Thornfield's research assistant. I could not help but overhear mention of yesterday's incident, and I feel compelled to speak truthfully about what I observed. Holmes's attention sharpened immediately. Pray continue, Mr. Whitmore. The young man glanced nervously toward the corridor. Dr. Thornfield was not in the laboratory for the entire period yesterday, as he claimed. He departed at approximately 12:30 and did not return until nearly 2 o'clock. When I questioned his absence, he became extremely agitated. Most illuminating, Holmes said. And what of his recent behavior? Have you noticed anything unusual in his work patterns? Whitmore's face grew troubled. 3 days ago, I discovered him examining a pressed specimen of silver-leaved wolfsbane, a plant I'd never seen in our collection. When I inquired about its origin, he ordered me from the laboratory in a most violent manner. Additionally, our ledger shows an unusually large withdrawal of lavender essential oil yesterday morning. Nearly 8 ounces. Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me. The same oil used to clean this safe, no doubt. Mr. Whitmore, you have provided invaluable assistance. After the young man departed, Holmes continued his examination with renewed energy. We proceeded to Dr. Thornfield's laboratory, where Holmes immediately noted scratches around the poison cabinet's lock, marks consistent with recent picking. Someone with considerable skill has accessed these compounds, Holmes observed, examining a ledger of chemical withdrawals. Yet our Dr. Thornfield seems almost eager to provide evidence of his guilt. The oil withdrawal is documented, his movements are unaccounted for, and now we find his personal effects at the scene. He produced a small surgical lancet from his pocket, one we had discovered near the disturbed soil where the wolfsbane specimen had been uprooted. The handle bore the clear initials MT. Surely this is conclusive, I suggested. Holmes frowned, turning the instrument in the gaslight. Perhaps too conclusive, Watson. A man of Thornfield's intelligence leaving his personalized surgical tool at the scene of a treasonous theft? It strikes a discordant note. He pocketed the lancet with evident dissatisfaction. We have our obvious suspect and a trail of evidence leading directly to his door. But when evidence arranges itself so conveniently, we must ask whether we are observing guilt or witnessing an elaborate misdirection. The game grows more complex by the hour. The return journey to Miss Ashworth's office provided Holmes with the opportunity to examine the cipher more thoroughly. He spread the copied document across her desk, weighing the corners with botanical specimens while she retrieved a comprehensive catalogue of Q's restricted collections. Your interpretation of the alphabetic sequences was correct, Holmes announced after several minutes of cross-referencing. Lav indeed denotes lavandula, aros the rosa, family, and so forth. However, the numeric prefixes suggest something more sophisticated than simple cabinet locations. Miss Ashworth traced her finger down a column of entries. Our restricted herbarium employs a dual classification system. The letter-number combinations could indicate both physical, location, and toxicity rating. B4, for instance, would place a specimen in cabinet B, drawer 4, with a danger classification of moderate to severe. Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Then we shall test this hypothesis directly. Lead us to your most dangerous holdings, Miss Ashworth. I suspect we shall find more than one gap in your collection. The restricted herbarium occupied a climate-controlled chamber behind multiple locks, its oak cabinets arranged with military precision. Holmes moved systematically through the cipher's references, Miss Ashworth opening each indicated drawer with growing alarm. At B4OS, 2 specimens of Rosa varieties lay displaced, their neat arrangements disturbed. The K1 Lav drawer revealed an empty space where a rare Mediterranean lavender specimen should have rested. Most disturbing was Dig 11, where powdered residue clung to the drawer's corners, evidence that someone had carefully scraped material from dried digitalis leaves. This is not random theft, Holmes observed, examining the pattern of missing materials. Our perpetrator selected specific compounds with precise knowledge of their applications. The question remains, medicinal or malevolent intent. Before Miss Ashworth could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Sir Erasmus appeared, his usually composed features drawn with strain, accompanied by Dr. Thornfield, whose pale complexion and nervous manner marked him as a man under considerable pressure. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Erasmus began, his voice carefully controlled, "I have been reviewing this situation with Dr. Thornfield. While certain irregularities may have occurred, I believe we can resolve this matter internally without further outside interference." Holmes regarded both men with keen interest. "How curious that you should arrive together, gentlemen, just as we discover evidence of systematic theft from your most sensitive collections. Dr. Thornfield, perhaps you could explain why your personal surgical lancet was found near the disturbed soil where the silver-leaved wolfsbane was uprooted?" Dr. Thornfield's reaction was immediate and telling. His hands trembled as he reached for his waistcoat pocket, then stopped abruptly. That is impossible. My instruments are always secured in my laboratory." "Yet here it is." Holmes produced the lancet, its initials clearly visible, along with evidence that someone with considerable botanical expertise has been assembling a collection of highly toxic plant materials. "The question is whether we are dealing with one conspirator or several." Sir Erasmus stepped forward, his administrative authority asserting itself. "Mr. Holmes, there are aspects of this situation that involve matters of national importance. During the Crimean conflict, certain research was conducted here. Research that some might consider sensitive even today." "Chemical weapons research," Holmes stated flatly. "The development of plant-based toxins for military application. The cipher refers not merely to stolen specimens, but to the formulae for compounds that could kill hundreds." The effect of this revelation was electric. Dr. Thornfield went even paler, while Sir Erasmus's mask of composure cracked entirely. "How could you possibly—" Sir Erasmus began, then stopped himself. "Because," Holmes continued relentlessly, "someone has been systematically collecting the exact materials needed to recreate those wartime experiments. Someone with access to your restricted files, knowledge of your security procedures, and the chemical expertise to weaponize botanical compounds." A commotion in the outer corridor interrupted his analysis. Gerald Whitmore burst into the chamber, his face flushed with alarm. "Sir Erasmus, Dr. Thornfield, you must come quickly. I've just discovered another lavender envelope in the main laboratory, and this one contains what appears to be a death threat." Holmes snatched the envelope before anyone else could react, noting immediately its identical paper and wax seal. The message within was brief but chilling. "The roots of treachery run deep at Kew. Unless the stolen research is returned within 24 hours, London shall learn how fatal flowers can be." "Gentlemen," Holmes announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "we are no longer dealing with simple theft. Someone is using your own research against you, and they possess both the knowledge and the materials to carry out their threat. The question now is not who stole the specimens, but who intends to use them, and whether we can stop them before they transform botanical science into an instrument of mass murder." The fog outside seemed to press against the windows with renewed intensity, as if nature itself sensed the deadly game now unfolding within Kew's hallowed halls. The second lavender envelope lay upon the laboratory bench, like some exotic specimen awaiting dissection, its elegant script a stark contrast to the clinical instruments surrounding it. Holmes examined the threatening message with methodical precision, his aquiline features sharp in the gaslight as Sir Erasmus paced with agitated steps and Dr. Thornfield slumped against a cabinet, his face ashen. "The ink is scarcely an hour old," Holmes observed, holding the paper toward the window. "This note was placed here while we examined the restricted herbarium. Our adversary moves within these walls with remarkable confidence." He turned to Whitmore, who hovered nervously near the door. "You discovered this on the central workbench. Precisely where?" "Beside the distillation apparatus, sir," the young assistant replied, his voice trembling. "I had stepped away for perhaps 10 minutes to check the greenhouse thermostats." Holmes lifted the envelope to his nose, then frowned. "Watson, observe the scent. How does it compare to our first specimen?" I sniffed cautiously. "Sweeter, somehow. Less medicinal." "Precisely. The bitter, almond undertone has vanished. This envelope bears pure lavender oil, unadulterated by cyanide traces." Holmes's eyes narrowed dangerously. A change in methodology suggests either carelessness or deliberate misdirection. He held both envelopes to the gaslight, comparing them with his magnifying glass. "Fascinating. The paper appears identical at first glance, yet observe the watermarks, Watson. The first bears a crown, this one an anchor. Different manufacturing batches, possibly different years entirely." Sir Erasmus stopped his pacing abruptly. "Different years. But we've used the same stationery supplier for—" He paused, his face growing pale. "No, that's not correct. We changed suppliers 3 years ago. This paper, this is from our old stock, unused since 1891. 1891, Holmes repeated, his voice taking on that particular intensity I recognized as the prelude to revelation. "The year your restricted archives were reorganized. Miss Ashworth, what personnel changes occurred during that reorganization?" Miss Ashworth's hands trembled as she consulted her records. Several researchers were dismissed or transferred. The most notable was Dr. Julian Vane, a brilliant but obsessive scientist who specialized in cardiac glycosides from digitalis species. He left under difficult circumstances. "And his current whereabouts?" "He died 2 years ago in a laboratory accident in Paris." She replied quietly. Holmes's expression grew skeptical. "How convenient. 2 laboratory accidents, both involving researchers from your Crimean War program." He turned his penetrating gaze upon Sir Erasmus. "For you have not told us everything about that program, have you, Director?" Sir Erasmus's composure cracked entirely. "Very well. The team consisted of more than Dr. Thornfield alone. There was Professor Edmund Ashcroft, who has since retired to Cornwall, and—" He glanced toward Miss Ashworth with evident reluctance. "Captain Richard Ashworth, your father, Miss Ashworth. He commanded security but possessed considerable chemical expertise." Miss Ashworth gasped. "My father? But he died 5 years ago in an accident here at Kew." "An accident that was never properly investigated," Holmes said grimly. "Dr. Thornfield, you were present that night, were you not?" Dr. Thornfield's remaining composure shattered. "I tried to save him. Richard had discovered something terrible about the original research. Someone had altered the formulae, transforming incapacitating agents into lethal weapons. He believed one of the team had been corrupted, possibly by foreign interests seeking perfected compounds." Before Holmes could respond, commotion erupted in the corridor. Gerald Whitmore appeared, supporting an elderly gentleman whose silver hair and weathered features spoke of advanced age, though his eyes retained fierce intelligence. "Professor Ashcroft," Sir Erasmus exclaimed, "what brings you from Cornwall in such weather?" The old scientist steadied, himself against the doorframe. "I received a lavender envelope 3 days ago. Inside was a pressed specimen of silver-leaved wolfsbane and a message, 'The past remembers those who betrayed it.' The fog delayed my journey, but I came immediately upon recognizing the specimen's significance." Holmes studied the professor intently. "You recognized it as part of your wartime research. The key component in our most dangerous formula. We called it argentum mortis, silver death. The modified compound could kill within hours while mimicking natural heart failure, nearly undetectable unless one knew precisely what to seek." Holmes stood abruptly, his face pale with sudden understanding. "Gentlemen, we have been investigating this matter entirely backwards. The theft was never about acquiring materials. Someone already possessed complete knowledge of the formulae. The theft was a declaration, an announcement that the past has returned to settle accounts." He moved to the poison cabinet, examining the scratched lock mechanism with renewed interest. "These marks angle upward and rightward, consistent with a right-handed person using tools clumsily. Yet Dr. Thornfield writes with his left hand. Someone has gone to considerable trouble to implicate you, Doctor, while the true perpetrator remains hidden in plain sight. The fog pressed against the windows with renewed intensity, as though nature itself sensed the deadly game now accelerating within Q's hallowed halls. Holmes remained motionless for several seconds, his penetrating gaze fixed upon Professor Ashcroft as though the elderly scientist were a specimen awaiting classification. The laboratory fell silent save for the distant hiss of gas burners and the rhythmic tick of a precision chronometer, while outside the November fog pressed against the windows with renewed intensity. "Professor," Holmes said at last, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated suspicion, "you recognize the silver-leaved wolfsbane specimen in your envelope with remarkable certainty for a plant supposedly destroyed 20 years ago. Perhaps you would enlighten us as to how such recognition was possible." The old man's weathered hands gripped the laboratory bench, his knuckles whitening under the strain. "Because I cultivated it myself during the war research. The silver-edged leaves result from a specific soil treatment involving carefully measured arsenic compounds. We created only 3 specimens, and all were ordered destroyed when the program terminated in 1891. "Ordered destroyed," Holmes repeated, his tone sharpening. "Yet one appears now, 2 decades later, in the hands of someone intimately familiar with both its botanical properties and its role in your weapons research." He turned to examine the cipher once more, his magnifying glass revealing subtle details in the handwriting. "Miss Ashworth, you mentioned that this resembles your father's script, yet something troubles you about it." She nodded, her face pale in the gaslight. "The overall formation is correct, but the pressure is wrong. My father wrote with the heavy hand of a military man. These letters are formed with the lighter touch of someone accustomed to delicate work." "Precisely observed," Holmes commended. "The forger possesses considerable skill, but lacks the unconscious habits that mark authentic penmanship. Dr. Thornfield, you write with your left hand, yet the scratches on the poison cabinet lock angle rightward and upward, consistent with right-handed manipulation using unfamiliar tools." Dr. Thornfield straightened, some of his earlier composure returning. "Then someone deliberately sought to implicate me while concealing their own involvement." "Indeed. And that someone required intimate knowledge of Q's personnel, procedures, and history." Holmes began pacing, his mind clearly assembling the scattered pieces of evidence. "Professor Ashcroft, when Captain Ashworth confronted you about the altered formulae, what specific concerns did he raise?" The professor's voice grew heavy with old regret. "Richard had been conducting a systematic review of our archived research. He discovered that someone had methodically enhanced the lethality of every compound we developed, transforming defensive agents into assassination tools. The modifications were subtle but unmistakable to someone with his chemical expertise." "And he suspected a member of your own team?" "He was certain of it. The alterations required access to restricted files, knowledge of our protocols, and considerable skill in organic chemistry. Only 3 people possessed all these qualifications." Holmes stopped pacing abruptly. "Dr. Thornfield, yourself, and Dr. Julian Vane." "Yes, though Vane had been dismissed from the program 6 months before the alterations were discovered. We thought him safely removed from any position to cause harm." Gerald Whitmore, who had been listening with growing comprehension, suddenly spoke with evident reluctance. "Mr. Holmes, there is something I must tell you about our groundskeeper, the man who tends the poison garden and works under the name Vincent." Holmes's attention sharpened immediately. "Continue, Mr. Whitmore." "He began employment here 6 months ago, claiming experience from botanical gardens in France. He is tall and gaunt, perhaps 50 years of age, with distinctive scarring about the hands and face. He requested special permission to cultivate rare aconitum variants and works unusual hours, often remaining after the gardens close." Whitmore paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Yesterday, while reviewing old laboratory records, I came across a photograph of Dr. Vane from 1890. The resemblance to our groundskeeper is unmistakable. The effect of this revelation was immediate and electric. Sir Erasmus stepped backward, his face draining of color, while Professor Ashcroft gripped his walking stick with trembling hands. "Impossible," Dr. Thornfield breathed. "Vane died in that laboratory fire in Paris. The reports were quite specific." "Reports," Holmes said grimly, "which were never independently verified by British authorities. A brilliant chemist, facing professional ruin and potential criminal charges, might well find it advantageous to stage his own death and assume a new identity." He moved to the window, peering into the swirling fog. "Consider the timeline, Watson. Dr. Vane disappears in 1892, supposedly dying in Paris. Our groundskeeper, Vincent, appears 6 months ago, requesting access to precisely the materials needed to recreate the Argentum Mortis compound. The Lavender envelopes begin arriving, bearing threats tied to research that only the original team members would fully understand. But what does he hope to accomplish?" Miss Ashworth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Holmes turned back, his expression grave. "Professor Ashcroft, what is the significance of tomorrow's date? November 23rd. The old scientist's face went ashen. "It is the anniversary of our final presentation to the War Office in 1874, the date they ordered the program terminated and all materials destroyed, the date that ended our careers and destroyed Vane's reputation. And now," Holmes concluded, "he has orchestrated this elaborate reunion, gathering all the surviving principals at Kew for what he doubtless considers poetic justice. The 24-hour deadline in his threat is not arbitrary. It is timed to coincide with the anniversary of his professional destruction." He began gathering his coat and hat with sudden decisiveness. "Gentlemen, Miss Ashworth, we are no longer investigating a simple theft. We are confronting a methodically planned revenge that has been 20 years in the making. Dr. Vane, or Vincent as he now styles himself, possesses both the materials and the expertise to carry out his threats. Our task is to locate him before tomorrow's anniversary provides him with the opportunity he has so patiently awaited." The fog seemed to press more heavily against the windows, as though nature itself sensed the deadly game now accelerating toward its climax within Kew's hallowed grounds. Holmes's mind was set with the certainty and precision that always accompanied true danger. With dusk falling and the fog thickening over Kew, he outlined his intentions in a low, urgent tone as we gathered in Miss Ashworth's office. "We must act along 2 lines," Holmes declared. "First, anticipate Vane's method and timing. He will strike on the morrow at the anniversary in a manner both symbolic and catastrophic. Second, we must disrupt his preparations and, if possible, force his hand before he is ready." Without further delay, Holmes instructed Miss Ashworth to issue formal invitations for a private archival review at 11 o'clock the next morning, summoning Sir Erasmus, Dr. Thornfield, Professor Ashcroft, and himself to the conference chamber overlooking the poison garden. "Vane expects such a gathering," Holmes reasoned. "We shall give him the illusion of success while we prepare to thwart him." He cautioned Sir Erasmus against closing the gardens or raising a public alarm. To do so would warn Vane and drive him to desperation. We must appear oblivious while quietly restricting access to the buildings most at risk. Meanwhile, Watson, you shall examine the conference room's ventilation, decanters, and all access points an hour beforehand, using your medical expertise and your revolver. With the plan set in motion, Holmes turned to the matter of Vane's whereabouts. If our adversary is indeed the man known as Vincent, he will be securing his lair tonight. I shall meet him under a different guise. Within the hour, Holmes had transformed himself into a humble gas fitter, his appearance altered with lamp-black, a battered cap, and the practiced slouch of a tradesman. "Few men are cautious before those they deem beneath notice," he remarked with a glint of anticipation. While Holmes vanished into the misty grounds, I led Sir Erasmus, Dr. Thornfield, and Professor Ashcroft along the gravel paths toward the infamous poison garden, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and hidden menace. The iron gate there showed recent oiling and subtle scratches, evidence of tampering by practiced hands. Holmes's deductions echoed in my mind. Vane was not working alone, nor had he acted without careful planning. We advanced cautiously, passing beds of aconitum, digitalis, and datura, their deadly beauty pale in the lantern's glow. At the garden's heart, the potting shed loomed, a brick structure, its windows dark. We entered, finding a laboratory of chilling sophistication. Distillation apparatus, racks of silver-edged wolfsbane, vials of extracted toxins, and, on the workbench, a brass canister affixed to a timing mechanism. A map of Q was spread beside it, marked with red ink at 3 points. The Palm House, the Temperate House, and the Princess of Wales Conservatory. Holmes's suspicions were correct, I breathed. A dispersal device set for noon tomorrow. If filled with argentum mortis, it would be catastrophic, Dr. Thornfield whispered. Just then, a floorboard creaked. Holmes, now in his disguise, had slipped inside behind us. "Remain silent," he mouthed. Through the window, a gaunt figure approached, lantern in hand, Vincent, or rather, Dr. Julian Vane. His scarred features were lit by the spectral glow, and his eyes gleamed with both intelligence and fanaticism. He knelt among the poisonous plants, murmuring, "Tomorrow the world will bow to your power." Holmes made his move, but Vane reacted with startling speed, casting a handful of powder into the air. "Hold your breath," Holmes cried, diving aside as the fine dust, dried datura pollen, billowed around us. In the confusion, Vane fled, vaulting the garden fence and vanishing into the shadows beyond. Holmes quickly led us back to the shed, his expression grave. "He has escaped, but he left behind the prototype. The map suggests 3 other devices are already in place, timed for the anniversary. Our window to act is narrowing." Holmes wasted no time. "Watson, you and Dr. Thornfield, the Palm House. Professor Ashcroft and Whitmore, the Temperate House. Miss Ashworth and I shall search the conservatory. Any sign of tampering or hidden canisters, call for assistance at once. We must locate and disable every device before noon tomorrow." As we prepared to disperse into the fog-laden night, a piercing scream echoed from the direction of the Palm House. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Quickly! The game has shifted. Vane is not working alone. Trust nothing and move with utmost caution." The deadly puzzle now pressed toward its climax, and in the darkness of Q's labyrinthine gardens, every shadow might conceal the hand of a murderer. The piercing scream from the direction of the Palm House cut through the fog-laden night like a blade, sending us racing along the gravel paths with hearts pounding. Holmes had already shed his gas-fitter's disguise, his lean form moving with the fluid precision of a hunting cat through the swirling mist. The great glass cathedral loomed before us, its iron framework barely visible, yet somehow more menacing in its partial concealment. The discovery. Inside the Palm House, the humid warmth struck us immediately, heavy with the scent of exotic foliage and something else. A faint sweetness that made Holmes's nostrils flare with immediate alarm. We found Gerald Whitmore crouched beside the central fountain, supporting a young gardener's assistant, who appeared dazed but conscious. The man's eyes were wide with terror, and his hands shook as he pointed toward the elevated walkway above. "I saw him, sir," the assistant stammered, "a tall figure in white, moving among the palms like a ghost. When I called out, something struck me from behind, not hard enough to render me unconscious, but sufficient to send me sprawling." Holmes knelt beside the man, examining his pupils with practiced efficiency. "Chloroform, administered lightly. Our adversary wanted you incapacitated, not killed. Watson, examine that overturned vessel near the fountain." The broken pottery fragments told their own story. Holmes lifted several pieces, noting the residue of lavender oil mixed with something darker and more sinister. "A testing vessel," he murmured. "Someone has been calibrating concentrations here, determining the precise dosage needed for the dispersal devices." The first device. A methodical search of the palm house revealed what we sought. Another brass canister, this one concealed within the ventilation housing near the building's eastern wall. Holmes examined it with meticulous care, his magnifying glass revealing details that spoke volumes about its construction. "Observe, Watson, the soldering here is markedly different from the prototype in the potting shed. This work shows the steady hand of someone accustomed to delicate mechanical operations, yet the spring tension is calibrated differently." He carefully disabled the timing mechanism with surgical precision. "We are not dealing with a single artificer, but rather a collaboration between at least two individuals with complementary skills." The device's timer had been set for precisely noon the following day, confirming our suspicions about the anniversary timing. Yet something in Holmes's expression suggested deeper concerns. Revelations and complications. As we secured the disabled device, Dr. Thornfield appeared at the palm house entrance, his face grave with new intelligence. "Mr. Holmes, we have found Professor Ashcroft in considerable distress at the Temperate House. He appears to be suffering from cardiac symptoms, though I suspect the cause may be more sinister than natural illness." We hastened through the fog to find the elderly scientist seated on a bench, his complexion ashen and his breathing labored. Holmes immediately knelt beside him, his keen eyes noting the telltale signs. "Professor, what have you consumed in the past 2 hours?" Holmes inquired with urgent precision. Only the tea that Miss Ashworth prepared in the conference room earlier," the old man gasped. "We all partook, though I fear I drank more than the others." Holmes's expression darkened with sudden comprehension. "Digitalis poisoning, administered through the tea service. Watson, your medical bag. Activated charcoal immediately. The symptoms will worsen rapidly without intervention." The pattern emerges. While I attended to Professor Ashcroft, Holmes examined the Temperate House with renewed intensity. The second device was located within the heating system, its construction showing the same mixed craftsmanship we had observed in the palm house. Yet as Holmes disabled this mechanism, his frown deepened. "The timing sequences are not synchronized, Watson. Each device operates on a slightly different schedule, suggesting either poor coordination between the conspirators or deliberate redundancy to ensure at least partial success." Miss Ashworth, who had been assisting with Professor Ashcroft's care, looked up with evident confusion. "But surely Dr. Vane would have ensured perfect coordination. His scientific training would indeed demand precision," Holmes interrupted, his eyes brightening with sudden insight. "Unless Dr. Vane is not the primary architect of the scheme, but rather a skilled craftsman working to another's design. The varying construction techniques, the mixed timing sequences, the convenient trail of evidence, all point to a more complex conspiracy than we initially supposed." The final location. Our search of the Princess of Wales Conservatory proved more challenging, the low-lying structure offering numerous concealment possibilities among its diverse plant collections. Holmes divided our party systematically, each pair assigned to specific sections while maintaining visual contact through the glass partitions. The third device was discovered by Sir Erasmus himself, concealed within the irrigation control system. As Holmes examined this final mechanism, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "This device shows yet another construction technique, cruder than the others, as though assembled by someone with theoretical knowledge but limited practical experience." He looked up sharply at our assembled group. "Gentlemen, Miss Ashworth, I believe we have been investigating this matter from an entirely incorrect premise." The true revelation. Holmes straightened, his penetrating gaze moving from face to face among our small party. Dr. Vane is indeed present at Kew, and he has indeed been cultivating the materials needed to recreate the Argentum Mortis compound. However, the evidence suggests he is not the mastermind of this elaborate revenge, but rather a tool being manipulated by someone far more cunning. Someone who has been planning this scheme for decades while maintaining the perfect facade of respectability. The fog seemed to press more heavily against the glass walls as Holmes continued. The varying construction techniques, the deliberate misdirection, the convenient timing, all point to a conspiracy that reaches to the very heart of Kew's administration. Tomorrow's anniversary will indeed see the culmination of this plot, but not in the manner we have been led to expect. He checked his pocket watch, its face barely visible in the gaslight. We have perhaps 10 hours before the final act unfolds. In that time, we must not only locate Dr. Vane himself, but identify and neutralize the true architect of this deadly game, someone who has been hiding in plain sight throughout our entire investigation. The deadly puzzle had revealed new layers of complexity, and as the fog swirled around Kew's ancient buildings, I could not shake the feeling that our most dangerous adversary had yet to reveal themselves. The pre-dawn hours stretched before us with the weight of accumulated secrets, each revelation adding another layer to the conspiracy that had festered within Kew's hallowed halls for 2 decades. Holmes had transformed Miss Ashworth's office into a makeshift laboratory, the 3 disabled devices arranged like specimens awaiting final diagnosis under the harsh glare of electric lamps. "Observe the construction variations, Watson," Holmes said, his magnifying glass moving methodically over each mechanism. The Palm House device shows professional engineering, precise tolerances, expert soldering, sophisticated timing apparatus. The Temperate House mechanism demonstrates adequate competence but lacks refinement. The Conservatory device is positively crude, assembled by someone with theoretical knowledge but minimal practical skill. I studied the disassembled components with growing comprehension. 3 different builders, then. But working toward what common purpose? That is precisely what troubled me until now, Holmes replied, straightening with sudden energy. These devices were never intended to function as instruments of mass murder. They are elaborate theatrical props, designed to create the illusion of a deadly conspiracy while concealing the true nature of the threat. Before I could respond, Miss Ashworth entered the office, her face pale with exhaustion and something deeper, a terrible understanding that had clearly shaken her to her core. In her trembling hands, she carried a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I've been searching through my father's personal effects, stored in the restricted archives. This journal, it contains everything. His suspicions, his investigations, his final discoveries before his death." Holmes took the journal with reverent care, his sharp eyes scanning the precise military handwriting that filled its pages. His expression grew increasingly grave as he absorbed the contents, occasionally pausing to examine specific entries with his magnifying glass. "Your father was a thorough investigator," Holmes said finally. He documented not only the formula alterations, but also financial irregularities in the program's budget, unauthorized meetings between Sir Erasmus and Continental agents, and, most damning of all, evidence that Dr. Vane was dismissed not for incompetence, but because he had begun to suspect the truth. Miss Ashworth sank into a chair, the weight of revelation overwhelming her composure. Then Dr. Vane was innocent of the original betrayal? More than innocent. He was a victim, systematically destroyed to protect the real traitor. Holmes closed the journal with deliberate precision. Sir Erasmus Pelling has been selling modified formulae to foreign powers for years, using the chaos of the program's termination to cover his tracks. When your father discovered the truth, the director arranged his death to appear accidental. The implications crashed over us like a tide. Holmes began pacing, his mind clearly racing through the connections. The lavender envelopes, the theatrical staging, the convenient trail of evidence, all designed by Sir Erasmus to deflect suspicion while eliminating the remaining witnesses to his crimes. He orchestrated Dr. Vane's return, manipulated his desire for revenge, and used him as the perfect scapegoat. A commotion in the corridor interrupted his analysis. Gerald Whitmore burst through the door, his face flushed with alarm and exertion. "Mr. Holmes, the devices, they're gone. All 3 canisters have been removed from their locations, and I've discovered something terrible in the old laboratory building." Holmes's eyes sharpened with immediate understanding. "The abandoned facility beneath the main ventilation system. Of course, the perfect location for a chemical dispersal that would affect the entire complex." We hastened through the fog-shrouded grounds toward the derelict structure, our footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The building loomed before us like a monument to forgotten science, its boarded windows and crumbling brickwork concealing secrets that had festered for 20 years. Holmes examined the exterior with methodical precision, noting fresh disturbances in the soil and recently oiled hinges on what appeared to be a sealed door. Someone has been using this facility regularly, despite its official abandonment. The question is whether we face Dr. Vane seeking justice or Sir Erasmus eliminating the final witnesses to his treachery. As we prepared to enter the abandoned laboratory, Holmes turned to address our small group with characteristic intensity. "Whatever we discover within these walls will determine not only the resolution of this case, but the fate of everyone who has been touched by the poisonous legacy of that wartime research. The game, as they say, approaches its final move." The fog seemed to press more heavily around the derelict building, as though nature itself sensed that the deadly secrets hidden within were about to be exposed. In the distance, the clock tower of Kew chimed 5 o'clock, marking the approach of dawn and the anniversary that had been 20 years in the making. The truth lay waiting in the darkness ahead, and with it, the final reckoning for crimes that had corrupted the very foundations of one of England's most respected institutions. The door to the abandoned laboratory yielded with a reluctant groan, releasing decades of accumulated secrets into the fog-laden night. Holmes advanced first, his electric torch cutting through shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose. The chamber beyond revealed the true scope of Sir Erasmus Pelling's 20-year deception, row upon row of preserved specimens, meticulous correspondence files, and chemical apparatus that bore unmistakable signs of recent systematic use. The final evidence. Holmes moved through the space with surgical precision, his keen eyes cataloguing each damning detail. "Observe, Watson. The dust patterns on these shelves show regular disturbance over years, not months. This facility has operated continuously since the official program's termination in 1891. He lifted a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with coded transactions. Financial records documenting the sale of botanical weapons to 3 foreign governments. Sir Erasmus has transformed Kew's research into a profitable enterprise in treachery." Miss Ashworth's voice trembled as she examined correspondence bearing her father's familiar handwriting. These letters, Papa was demanding explanations for unexplained expenditures, questioning Sir Erasmus about unauthorized meetings. The final letter is dated just 3 days before his death. "Your father discovered the truth," Holmes confirmed grimly. "Sir Erasmus arranged the laboratory accident to silence him, then systematically destroyed evidence while positioning Dr. Vane as the perfect scapegoat, a dismissed researcher with motive for revenge." The confrontation. A sound from the laboratory's depths drew our attention. In the final chamber, we discovered not one figure, but 2, locked in a confrontation 20 years in the making. Dr. Julian Vane, his scarred features etched with accumulated anguish, faced Sir Erasmus Pelling across a sophisticated distillation apparatus, the true weapon, far more complex than the decoy devices we had disabled. "You destroyed everything I valued," Vane said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. My career, my reputation, my very identity. 20 years I have waited for this moment of reckoning. Sir Erasmus maintained his administrative composure even now. Reckoning? You speak as though science serves sentiment rather than profit. Your formulae were brilliant, Vane, but your conscience made you unreliable. I simply found more practical applications. Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through their mutual hatred with clinical precision. Gentlemen, this theatrical confrontation serves neither justice nor truth. Dr. Vane, you have spent months gathering evidence of Sir Erasmus's crimes, yet you risk destroying that evidence through violent action. And Sir Erasmus, your elaborate scheme to frame Dr. Vane has already failed. The revelation. Failed. Sir Erasmus's mask of control flickered momentarily. Completely. The 3 devices you manipulated Dr. Vane into constructing were never intended as weapons. They were components in this final apparatus, designed to eliminate the remaining witnesses while framing Vane for attempted mass murder. But your plan required retrieving those devices to complete your weapon, and in doing so, you revealed intimate knowledge of their construction and placement. Knowledge only their true architect would possess. Dr. Vane's eyes widened with sudden comprehension. The lavender envelopes. You sent them, Sir Erasmus. You orchestrated this entire gathering, planning to poison us all while appearing to be another victim. Holmes nodded approvingly. Precisely. A masterful plan, save for one fatal flaw. You underestimated the persistence of documentary evidence. Captain Ashworth's journal survived your attempts at concealment, preserved by his daughter's diligence. Your own meticulous record-keeping has provided irrefutable proof of your crimes. Justice served. The sound of approaching footsteps announced Inspector Lestrade's arrival, summoned by Holmes's earlier telegram. Sir Erasmus's shoulders sagged as the weight of inevitable defeat settled upon him. The carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled, revealing the calculating criminal beneath. The evidence is overwhelming, Holmes observed as the constables led Sir Erasmus away. 20 years of treachery, documented in your own hand. The poison garden of Kew has yielded its final, bitter harvest. Dr. Vane surrendered the vial of Argentum Mortis to Holmes's steady hand, his quest for vengeance transformed into something approaching peace. Justice, he murmured, served not through violence, but through truth. Aftermath. As dawn broke over the fog-shrouded gardens, Holmes and I stood with Miss Ashworth at the laboratory entrance, watching as the last of the evidence was catalogued and removed. The lavender envelope mystery had concluded not with explosive drama, but with the quiet satisfaction of methodical detection triumphing over elaborate deception. "Your father's name is cleared," Holmes told Miss Ashworth gently. "His journal will ensure that history remembers him as a man of integrity who died defending the very principles Sir Erasmus betrayed." The morning sun began its struggle against London's eternal fog, and I reflected on how even the most carefully tended gardens can harbor the deadliest secrets, until patient investigation brings them, at last, into the light. The familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings seemed doubly welcoming after the fog-shrouded intrigues of Kew Gardens. Holmes had settled into his chair with the satisfied air of a man who has successfully untangled a particularly complex knot, while I attended to the mundane task of cataloguing the case notes that would eventually form the basis of this narrative. "A most instructive affair, Watson," Holmes observed, reaching for his pipe with practiced ease. "One that demonstrates how the most elaborate deceptions often contain the seeds of their own destruction. Sir Erasmus Pelling's fatal error lay not in his original crimes, but in his compulsive need to document his own cleverness." I looked up from my writing. "You refer to his personal journal." "Among other things, but more significantly to his use of the lavender stationery itself." Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe. The watermark analysis proved decisive. The threatening notes bore the anchor insignia of paper manufactured in 1891. suggesting Dr. Vane had hoarded it for decades. However, microscopic examination revealed the ink was not the iron gall mixture common 20 years ago, but a modern aniline dye introduced only recently. Old paper, new ink, a discrepancy that betrayed the forger's hand. And the varying construction of the devices? Holmes smiled with evident satisfaction. Theatrical misdirection of the highest order. Pelling constructed the sophisticated Palm House device himself, demonstrating his engineering capabilities. He manipulated Dr. Vane into building the second, adequate but less refined. The crude conservatory device was hasty work when time grew short. The varying craftsmanship was designed to suggest multiple conspirators, diluting suspicion from the solitary architect. What of Dr. Vane's ultimate fate? Lestrade informs me that given his cooperation and the coercion involved, he will likely be permitted to retire quietly to the continent. The man was seeking redemption, not revenge. His only crime was trusting a mentor who had long since abandoned honor for profit. Holmes rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the London fog with contemplative eyes. The case illustrates a troubling truth about human nature, Watson. Evil rarely announces itself with theatrical flourishes. Instead, it wears the mask of respectability, hiding behind institutional authority and administrative propriety. Sir Erasmus corrupted Kew Gardens not through dramatic villainy, but through the gradual erosion of ethical boundaries. You speak of moral gradations, I observed. Precisely. Consider the spectrum of culpability we encountered. Sir Erasmus designed and profited from treachery. Dr. Thornfield suspected irregularities, yet remained silent. Professor Ashcroft chose comfortable ignorance over uncomfortable truth. Each man took a step backward from his conscience, trusting that the abyss would never quite reach his feet. And Miss Ashworth? Holmes's expression softened perceptibly. She represents the antithesis of such moral cowardice. Like her father before her, she chose truth over convenience, justice over comfort. It is a rare quality in our age of expedient compromises. A knock at the door interrupted our discussion. Mrs. Hudson entered bearing a small package, which proved to contain a magnificent orchid of the genus Cattleya, its petals a vibrant purple entirely free of sinister associations. The accompanying note expressed gratitude that transcended mere words. Miss Ashworth will make an excellent director, Holmes remarked, examining the flower with genuine appreciation. She possesses her father's integrity and, I venture to say, a keener eye for administrative detail than her predecessor. The gardens are in capable hands. He set the orchid aside and took up his violin, drawing the bow across the strings in a low, contemplative melody that gradually resolved into something approaching hope. It strikes me as profoundly ironic, he mused, his eyes closing as the music filled our modest chambers, that in nature's infinite variety, the deadliest poisons often wear the fairest guises. We have walked among flowers that could stop the heart and scents that could steal the breath. Yet the most dangerous element we encountered was not botanical at all, but rather the avarice of a man who believed himself above both natural and moral law. The fire crackled softly in the grate as Holmes's melody evolved into a more complex composition, weaving themes of danger and resolution into harmonious unity. Outside, the eternal London fog pressed against our windows, but within our familiar rooms burned that peculiar light composed of reason, justice, and unwavering determination to seek truth wherever it might lead. The lavender envelopes, I reflected aloud, what was their ultimate significance? Holmes paused in his playing, a slight smile touching his austere features. They were symbols, Watson, of innocence corrupted, beauty concealing poison, the very duality that characterized this entire affair. In the language of flowers, lavender represents purity and devotion. Yet these particular specimens carried death and deception. A fitting metaphor for our modern age, where the most respectable facades may conceal the most poisonous intentions. With that philosophical observation, he returned to his violin and I to my writing, both of us content in the knowledge that justice had prevailed through patient observation, logical deduction, and the courage to pursue truth despite its uncomfortable implications. The December frost had transformed London into a crystalline wonderland, the yellow fog of November replaced by air so crisp it seemed to ring like crystal when disturbed by passing carriages. 3 weeks had elapsed since our return from Kew Gardens, and the affair of the lavender envelopes had reached its final, satisfying resolution in the chambers of the Old Bailey. Holmes sat by our roaring fire, annotating a treatise on botanical chemistry with the same methodical precision he applied to criminal investigation. Inspector Lestrade had departed moments earlier, bearing news of Sir Erasmus Pelling's conviction and the systematic destruction of all remaining Argentum Mortis materials under War Office supervision. "The scoundrel maintained his arrogance to the end," I observed, reviewing my case notes. "Even in the dock, he proclaimed his actions patriotic rather than treasonous." "The final refuge of the corrupt," Holmes replied without looking up, though I confess a certain satisfaction in the evidence that sealed his fate. "Watson, do you recall my initial fascination with the lavender's soil composition? Indeed, you spoke of Surrey chalk versus Sicilian volcanic earth." Holmes finally closed his book, his grey eyes gleaming with scientific triumph. "That observation proved more prescient than I initially realized. Yesterday's final chemical analysis revealed traces of a specific arsenic isotope in the lavender oil used to scent those threatening envelopes. Sir Erasmus, in his vanity, had distilled the oil himself from bushes planted along the poison garden's perimeter, bushes that shared contaminated groundwater with the silver-leaved wolfsbane specimens. The implications struck me immediately. The arsenic compounds used to create the mutation had leached into the surrounding soil. Precisely. The lavender roots absorbed these isotopes, concentrating them in the essential oil. Sir Erasmus literally perfumed his threats with the chemical signature of his crimes. No defense counsel could explain away such definitive scientific evidence linking him personally to every threatening envelope. Holmes rose and moved to the mantelpiece, where a pressed specimen of pure English lavender rested beside his pipe, Miss Ashworth's gift, free of contamination or deceit. Her recent letters detailed the comprehensive reforms being implemented at Kew. Enhanced security protocols, independent oversight committees, and complete transparency in research activities. She writes that Professor Ashcroft has donated his entire research collection to the public archives, Holmes noted, a gesture of atonement for years of willful blindness. Dr. Thornfield has accepted a teaching position in Edinburgh, removing himself from the scene of his moral compromises. And Dr. Vane departed for Switzerland, where he intends to pursue legitimate pharmaceutical research under his own name. 20 years in the wilderness of false identity, driven by the need to clear his reputation. Now vindicated, he seeks only the quiet satisfaction of honest work. Holmes reached for his violin, examining its elegant curves with the eye of a connoisseur. The irony, Watson, is that lavender possesses genuinely beneficial properties, calming effects, antiseptic qualities, therapeutic applications. Sir Erasmus corrupted not merely an institution, but the very symbol of healing and purity. Yet the institution survives, I observed. Miss Ashworth's leadership suggests that even corrupted systems can be redeemed through determined effort. An optimistic observation, and one I hope proves accurate. Holmes tucked the instrument beneath his chin. Though I suspect eternal vigilance remains the price of institutional integrity. Human nature being what it is, there will always be those who view positions of trust as opportunities for exploitation. The room filled with a melancholic yet peaceful melody, notes that seemed to speak of resolved discords and restored harmony. As the music swirled like aromatic smoke from Holmes's pipe, I reflected on our strange journey, from Miss Ashworth's terrified arrival to the fog-shrouded terror of the Palm House, and finally to this quiet resolution. "You will chronicle this affair, I presume?" Holmes asked during a pause in his playing. "I shall endeavor to capture its essential elements: the locked room mystery, the botanical intrigue, the gradual revelation of long-concealed crimes. Then emphasize the methodical nature of the investigation. The public enjoys sensational narratives, but there is value in demonstrating that patient observation and logical analysis triumph over even the most elaborate deceptions." His gray eyes reflected the firelight thoughtfully. "And perhaps mention that the deadliest poisons are not always botanical in nature. Ambition, avarice, and moral cowardice can corrupt more thoroughly than any chemical compound." Outside, London's evening bells began their familiar chorus, marking the transition from day to night. Holmes returned to his violin, his mind already turning toward whatever problem the morrow might bring. The case of the Lavender envelopes had concluded, its mysteries unraveled through the application of reason to evidence. "One final observation, Watson," Holmes said as I prepared to retire. "Throughout this affair, we encountered numerous suspects and pursued various theories. Yet the solution ultimately rested upon the simplest principle of detection, that truth leaves traces even the most careful criminal cannot entirely erase. Sir Erasmus believed his meticulous planning would protect him, never realizing that his very meticulousness provided the evidence of his guilt." With that philosophical conclusion, he returned his attention to his music and his thoughts, while I reflected on how even the most carefully tended gardens must eventually yield their secrets to those patient enough to examine what lies beneath the surface beauty. The Lavender envelopes had delivered their final message, that justice, like nature itself, cannot be permanently suppressed by human artifice.